Okay, so we are now recording, and I will now briefly share my slides. Okay, so welcome everyone to our weekly call. Quick shout out before we start to our sponsors, DNS OARC, and thank you for their continuing support, which is, as always, very much appreciated. The plan for the call today, we're just going to sort of talk a little bit about the newly created European Commission Multi-Stakeholder Forum on Internet Standards Deployment, which is a bit of a mouthful. We've probably, from now on, we just call it the Multi-Stakeholder Forum. And I think hopefully everyone will know what we're talking about. You may have seen a sort of change, a minor change. Originally, I sort of put down Vittorio Bertola from Open Exchange as well as one of three people that might share their views, but he's rather cheekily on holiday, so and on a train somewhere in Italy. So it didn't seem wise to rely on a probably shaky Wi-Fi reception for Vittorio to join us. So the plan is that Ross and Philippe will share their initial impressions, and both of whom are on now. Actually, I was going to say I thought Philippe might be joining slightly later, because I know, Philippe, you did mention, I think, that there could be a slight delay before you could join, but here you are anyway, so that's fantastic. So it's going to be pretty informal, just to get your sense on how that first meeting went from couple of weeks ago, and then we'll sort of move on to some other things. So that's the plan. So with that in mind, let me stop sharing. And this is obviously unrehearsed. So Ross and Philippe, the floor is yours to just sort of give your sort of initial impressions, any other thoughts you may have on how that first session went. So looking forward to hearing what you've got to share.
I think the most surprising thing for me was that the biggest of the four work streams as far as participants was actually the DNS one, which I was not expecting at all. But no, I thought the meeting was run very well. I think, I mean, I have to applaud the commission for, identifying the work streams and then realizing that bringing in those with operational expertise was going to be a very important component in making this, a realistic effort. And so I think that was really great. There was a lot of very active participation, which I think was very good. A lot of people with a lot of real world experience that came to bear on it. And the other surprising thing I think was that, and I think it was surprising to most of the technical folks there, was that it was very focused on DNSSEC and really not much else as far as the presentations that were delivered to us. And I think everybody pretty much agreed that while that was an important component, it certainly was not the majority of what we should be discussing, or at least not the whole of what we should be discussing. Other things that came up were things such as encrypted DNS, obviously very interesting to everyone on this call, as well as protective DNS and some, not direct platform security, but platform security concerns from a resiliency perspective, without going into directly, specifying platform requirements, but basically saying that, those need to be accounted for and the resiliency needs to be accounted for as well. Obviously, as the introductory meeting, we didn't get into any really specific details about any of that. I expect that the next meeting will be much more focused on that. And I think the key first step that they want us to focus on now is identifying existing best practices that we will build from and build on, and then come up with any additional information for implementing those standards, and then defining timelines that would be realistic for implementing those standards. That was kind of the mission that they laid out for us. They had a nice introductory message from Vint Cerf that I thought was particularly interesting, and he basically laid out that keeping a mind on interoperability was very important. That was the key message I took from his message, and I think it was a good message to start out with, and basically saying that we want to ensure security. We want to make sure everything continues to work together as it does today.
Perhaps I have a question, but Philippe, did you want to come in and just add your thoughts?
Certainly, thank you, Andrew. I hope you can hear me, by the way.
Yeah, clear.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, just to add a couple of things, maybe for those of you who would not have received the call for interest. That is, so there are 3 work tracks, I think they call it. It's very broad, but for the 3 tracks, what was surprising to me was that the expected outcome isn't very clear, to be honest. I think there's an intent for the group to come up with best practices in the areas of email security, DNS or DNS security, as Ross said. I think the last one is, I think it's called routing, but it's essentially IPv6 migration to a large extent. And so it's very broad. It to me at least, and I was participating to this remotely, so I appreciate that maybe the sense of the room may be different, but the expected outcome is still, at least to me, quite vague. What was surprising in that respect, although not really surprising for a group convened by the EC, was that in a lot of interventions, there was some expectations for this group or for some of these issues to be addressed through regulation or some provisions in some would-be regulation, if you see what I mean. Probably not surprising for a group convened by the EC, but probably more surprising for the topics that we were dealing with. So that was the second element of surprise to me. Otherwise, I think the conversation went reasonably well. I was slightly frustrated by as Ross said, the sort of limited remit of DNSSEC versus DNS security. But even on DNSSEC, I found that some of the reasons for the sort of lack of endorsement, for lack of a better word, were not really relative to the way DNSSEC is deployed today or not deployed, wasn't really discussed. Let me just give you an example, and speaking from personal experience. The reason why we have deployed DNSSEC on some of our flagship domain names, it happens to be hosted by a third-party provider. It's just that 2 years ago, we realized that we didn't tick the box. It was a third-party provider who never mentioned that it could be DNSSEC enabled. We realized that it wasn't, and we just, through a couple of emails, discussed the conditions under which DNSSEC could be deployed. But it wasn't a technical issue, if you see what I mean, not even a question of price. And given that a large number, as you would expect, domain names are not hosted by the registrant, I would assume that most of them are totally unaware of the possibility of enabling DNSSEC on their domain names. So anyway, just through this, it was essentially technical as a discussion, which is a good thing, but maybe not quite to the point of of potential avenues for improving the current situation.
Interesting, because I thought, and correct me if this became clearer in the discussion. The original intent was that this group would provide guidance on best practice by signposting existing best practice documents rather than authoring new ones, that would enable people in scope for NIS2 to, if they followed obviously and adopted appropriately that best practice, that they would be compliant with the relevant elements, if applicable to them, such as with, as you say, DNS security or email security or routing or IP security. So it was, I thought that was the original premise, but to be fair, it could have evolved since the original communications, to be honest. So it may have become slightly broader than that.
No, I think you have a pretty good handle on what at least they expressed to us that they were looking for. But like Philippe said, there was no specific format or anything like that specified. It was kind of like, we want guidance, but didn't really specify what that was. I think they were still talking about building the technical editorial groups, so those that'll actually be writing it. I think that the formation of that will then have to drive some of what that is going to end up looking like, along with, like you said, identifying the standards that things are going to be based off of.
Yeah, fair enough. And yeah, not unreasonable. First meeting, there will be some iterations, no doubt, of the thinking. Over time, you got the normal sort of group forming elements that need to happen along the way. And to that point, perhaps out of interest, in terms of structure, was everyone brought together in a sort of plenary, or were you subdivided into the four? No, it was a sort of plenary.
They kept everybody together, and part of that was because there were multiple people that had interest in multiple work streams. Yeah. Right. So some of the, many of the email guys specifically were like, well, I'm here for email, but I'm also very interested in DNS because it plays heavily into, the email security side. So I definitely think there's a fair amount of overlap. I think the routing one is probably less overlapping than the DNS and email. And I think a lot of the discussions around IPv6 specifically were pretty interesting, particularly when we got into the discussion of whether or not it should be pushing towards an IPv6 only world, which, while I think there's some ideal reasons for moving that way, I think forcing that upon, just those in the EU would be very challenging to kind of cut off pieces of the network, unless they were going to also offer, DNS 6.4 and NAT 6.4 as a service to interconnect with other things. And I don't think that's realistic at that scale.
Yes, I'm reminded of the presentation. I think it was Jeff Houston gave one of the ITF meetings, in fact, more precisely, one of the IEPG sessions at an ITF meeting, probably 3 or 4 meetings ago, when he looked specifically at IPv6 and the DNS. And you could sort of conclude from his presentation that we should be deprecating IPv6 because of the very low percentage sort of successful queries. I'm obviously hugely simplifying his presentation, and the deprecation was very much tongue-in-cheek. But that would have been a reasonable conclusion when you compared and contrasted the success rate with IPv4, IPv6. So yeah, it will be quite bold if the direction of travel was IPv6 only. I suppose you get to the inevitable, well, if somebody doesn't do that, then will it ever get to the high sort of adoption rates that are desired? But yeah, well, maybe that's a subject for debate within that within the forum over the next 12 months or so that it's intended to run.
They said that I think the outer bound was 24 months that they had for it, but they said we didn't have to take the whole time.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't on the sort of work method that the commission uses, and I don't know how this ultimately will be organized. But what was interesting is that um, most I don't know about all the participants, but most of those who spoke out were indeed mostly well, they intervened in I don't know how to put it, but on the three topics, if you see what I mean. So it was organized as a plenary, but they were, I think, 1 day each, Ross, like if memory serves me well, which meant that you could, I was only registered for the DNS security as it was labeled originally, work track, but I sort of followed the three tracks. And I think, so we shall see how that will be organized in the future. But that sort of explains why it's at this point it's relatively broad in
Yeah.
terms of remit. And just to address Michael's question in the chat, it was recorded for note taking only. So unfortunately, you can't listen to this. So it's not the recording will not be public.
There is a URL with information about the initiative, and literally as I say that, I see Vicky is rather helpfully posted what I was probably going to say was, yeah, which describes what it's intended to do. So that was perfect timing, Vicky. I'll slip you some money afterwards for timing that just as I was speaking, which was pretty impressive. Yeah, so yeah, if anyone just wants some sort of general information, that's probably as good a place as any. But is the intent then, Ross or Philippe, that the machinations of the group will be kept within the group, although presuming the output will obviously become public?
So no, they did say, and the site isn't up yet, but they said that there was going to be, the minutes would be posted, the participant lists would be posted. They haven't sent us the actual site of where that is yet, and they also talked about, other shared tools that we'll be using, Teams and other things, but I haven't seen any details on that yet as far as accounts or how that's actually going to be set up. But I have wondered when it was going to go up, because as Philippe said, they did a recording for the purposes of note taking, and they're not going to release the recordings, but they will release the notes publicly.
Yeah. So I guess you'll all be interested to see those whilst you can still remember roughly what was said. Yeah, I was going to say, anyone else got any questions, please jump in. And Vicky's done exactly that. You're obviously reading my thoughts today, Vicky, which is slightly scary. And I feel sorry for you. It's a dark place.
It is scary. So, Ross, I know that you were involved with the NIST secure DNS deployment. I don't know the right label for it. And by the way, I think that was an excellent document. I'm always interested in comparing the way that the Europeans work versus the American system. I'm just curious, how this approach in your mind compared to that approach, because
Wow, that is so different. I mean, the way NIST tends to do stuff, and I know obviously NIST and NIST 2 being so close in sounding is also an interesting twist of all of it. But I think the interesting part of it was, we were starting with an existing document, right? And Scott already had some ideas on what he kind of wanted to do in the next iteration, and Cricket had talked to him about some of that as well, about adding, encrypted DNS, protective DNS, and those topics. So it was an interesting collaboration in writing it out and then going through the public comment period, whereas this is kind of in the opposite, right? Because we're having the discussions with the group first. And as I understand the way it will work, as we get into the drafting of guidance, whatever you want to call it, phase, it will be the technical editorial group will write something. They will hand it off to the work stream, and then those within the work stream will provide comments. And then the unresolved comments will be what we'll actually address in the meetings. So it'll be interesting because it'll be like a multi-round public comment period kind of as you go through it. Now, I don't know if there will be any public comment outside of, whoever participates in the forum, which is still open. So
right. So in the case of the NIST thing, you guys, the external or participants or whatever, basically drafted the thing that in this EU context is going to be drafted by the technical team. Is that right? So,
that's my understanding. Yeah.
I mean, that seems to me how they compare. I guess the other thing is that the NIST document is more like, design considerations, operational recommendations. It's not like a list of IETF standards. It's it's like deployment guidelines, I guess, as opposed. I don't know. I mean, I think the resulting document is super useful, and as the prior ones have been super useful out of NIST. And even though it's not what you would consider an internet standard, I hope they will consider that as an input.
Well, I'll certainly be advocating for that, but I do have a bias there. But
Yeah.
One of the things they want to do is identify existing standards rather than writing new ones. So with that being kind of even though it still hasn't been released, it's supposed to be published soon.
So that could be considered a standard then for the purposes of this. I wasn't sure if it would.
I believe
was thinking
so.
IETF drafts as standards. Okay. All right. Great.
Yeah, I think they're open to considering any best practices. I don't think they didn't provide any specific limitations. They just basically said, industry internationally recognized best practices right now. NIST obviously being US focused doesn't, necessarily map itself as readily to what the EC is doing, but the
internet is the same on both sides of the pond. So
right. And intercompatibility. And when Cricket, Scott, and I worked on it, we were very conscious about being vendor agnostic and basically laying out, rather than really specific things like you must do this, where it was more high level considerations of, you should be doing encrypted DNS, right? Rather than saying you should be doing, dot with these parameters and things like that. Because that's right. Well,
the earlier NIST documents were really bind specific, which is probably partly why I was so focused on them. But I think the current one, the one that you guys worked on, is really much better. Okay, well, I'll just mute myself, but I was hoping that was going to be an input to this process, because we really don't need completely different sets of BCPs for the US and Europe. That is not helpful.
Hold that thought for after we finish talking about this, Vicky. We may come back to that just to depress you. But in the meantime, Jim, I think, has got a question.
Yeah, just a sort of observation following on from that, really. Something that I was discussing during the forum was the fact that if we assume that some of this is coming out of NIS 2, number 2, then ENISA, the European Cybersecurity Organization, has already provided technical deployment guidance for NIS 2. That does include a DNS in a couple of places. Arguably, it could be implied elsewhere as well. And actually, that does reference 881 NIST with a T in one place. But parking that to one side, there is some stuff there that is described, let's say, that might influence the scope of the multi-stakeholder forum. One of which is following best practice guidelines, which would, of course, argue imply NIST with a T, 881 too. So I would very much hope that leads to some convergence there. And I did get the impression that the forum wasn't designed to reinvent wheels, more to point people to wheels that were already working. So, but yeah, worth looking at that ANISA technical deployment guidance if people haven't.
Yeah, and I think it was great that you brought that up in particular because of the narrow focus that it seemed to, that the commission seemed to have on DNSSEC. And I think once you pointed out that ANISA guide specifically, I think that really, I think that brought a lot of weight behind what you were saying, and that we needed to have a broader scope for the DNS security work stream, at least.
Yeah, I'd forgotten about the ANISA guidance, but that's a very good point. Because that was late-ish last year, I think that was published. I'll put a link with the notes because I can't remember.
Yeah, it was updated in, I think, June last year, Andrew, and it was updated from what it originally had, which again was a focus more on DNSSEC and not all the rest of the aspects of security around the DNS. But of course, under NIS 2, there's lots of discussion around things like resiliency and whatever, which of course doesn't necessarily call out DNS by name any more than it does particular brands of router or firewalls or whatever, but it's sort of all implied. So there's that sort of angle to consider too.
So it might be helpful for this stakeholder forum if some of the stuff it publishes effectively supersedes that ANISA guidance. It might want to say so explicitly in case people.
Yeah, probably be good to update the ANISA guidance. I mean, just a personal view.
That would be
looking across regulated entities under NIS2 transposition, then it would be something that those regulated entities could look at in terms of compliance. It also has quite a lot of examples of what good looks like, so it's quite practical in terms of compliance as well. So it's a good document.
Yeah. Okay. Well, yeah, that was helpful. Thank you. Anyone else got any comments or
just
questions?
as a side note, if I may, Andrew, to comparing this group with NIST, when you compare this group with other advisory groups from the EC, what was interesting was also the number of members, or at least active participants, that would be outside of the European Union compared to other advisory groups, probably because this one is relatively open, and probably also because of its very nature, because the internet being the internet. I think we would expect to have people not only from within the union, but that's an interesting feature rather than a bug.
Yeah, fun enough, I do recall in the last, apologies again for a long-winded name, high-level group on internet governance that the Commission hosts, they did make a point of emphasising then that they were open to non-EU nationals participating in this, I guess because of the whole discussion about digital sovereignty and whatnot, in case there were any misconceptions in that. So yeah, that's interesting. I mean, roughly how many people have signed up so far, if any of you can recall?
I think they said it was about 95.
Okay.
As a whole.
It was a large group, yeah. And I would say at least half of whom were interested in the three topics. I would say roughly. So that's a large group.
It is. Yeah.
And as a side note as well, I think I think there was a question in the chat on whether there was any discussions within the group along the lines of blocking or things that we talked about last week, for example. None at all, as far as I can recall. There was no reference to block lists or national initiatives that we see these days across Europe. I don't recall any of those in that group.
Yeah, protective DNS was mentioned, but we definitely didn't go into it in detail, and certainly not in the context of mandatory lists like you had covered last week in Italy. Obviously, that's a whole different set of discussions. My guess is that it will probably be similar to how it is in the NIST document, where it will be it's a good idea to use threat intelligence on your DNS platform without getting into specifics of saying you need to be using these specific lists and doing these certain things. That might be a little too prescriptive.
Yeah. It'd be surprising if it said randomly, Ross, that the Infoblox protective DNS is the preferred implementation for NIS2 compliance, although I'm sure you'd be very pleased if it did say such a thing. But probably.
Well, I having exposure to that threat intel team and the amazing work that they do, I think they could find a lot of great things in what's coming out from that. My guess is that it would probably be a combination, right? I mean, part of the value in threat intelligence is having multiple sources, I think.
Yeah, true. Yeah. Such as DNS for EU might plausibly be in this context quite relevant, were that to be relevant to reference. Okay, anyone else got any comments or questions? And a question in the chat, I'll double check afterwards, Vicky, if that's all right, INISA reference. And I'll definitely post a link to the right one post call, just for the avoidance of doubt. It probably is, but
I believe that is the one.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it probably is. It's very non-specific and high level. I mean, in contrast, for instance, with the NIST guidance.
Yeah. Okay. And I should remind people that if anyone is inspired that they might wish to be part of this august body, it remains open for new joiners. And again, I'll post the link as a reminder should you wish to pursue that. There is an application process. I think you have to fill out some stuff, and then it's processed by the commission team. Although it sounds like there's not a shortage of participants, but they did make a point of saying before Christmas that they were happy for people to continue to apply after the first meeting had taken place. So if you wish, I'm sure there are still some spare virtual seats that you could occupy. Right, okay, well, I hope that was useful, and thanks, Ross and Philippe and Jim for contributing your thoughts. That was really helpful. I guess we'll watch with interest to see how this works over the next couple of years then. And as and when the notes become available, again, I'll share the link so people can see that when they're published. Right, so let me go back to sharing my slides again. Right, which I'm now doing, so let me continue. I'll do a few bits of news roundup, and then talk about some future events and so on. And I'm going to pick on also a couple of things from last week, because we were somewhat pressed for time. I think I had about 2 minutes at the end of the really interesting conversation. There's a couple of things I thought I'd just mention. But anyway, and as always, I'm not going to go through every one of these. Those of you on the mailing list for the news headlines will have had them already. If you haven't and want to be added, message me and I'll so happily add you, and you should get them first thing most Monday mornings to read at your leisure. Yeah, interesting piece on why brands should be interested in the new GTLD process that's going to sort of kick off from the end of April. But the one I wanted to mention specifically, going back to the point that Vicky made about the internet's the same either side of the Atlantic, is an interesting thought piece in Circle ID from James Gorgon. I think that's how you might pronounce it, probably. Just so it was driven by sort of federalism or digital sovereignty sort of perspective. And he sort of posits the idea of the melt net, where you revert back to what the internet started out at as the sort of network of networks. And he sort of touches on the potential for sort of federated namespaces rather than a single cohesive namespace. Maybe different protocols being used on the various networks, but then as using TCP/IP for the core infrastructure. But maybe, and he does specifically mention new IP as an example, which could be used in some of the subnets, and he was writing it. I didn't check his background, but he talked a lot about BRICS. So I'm assuming from, and he mentioned specifically Brazil, and I think we did have at least one person on the call from Brazil, coincidentally today. But yeah, it's an interesting article. So those of you that are interested in internet governance related stuff, that might be worth a look, just to provoke your own thoughts on the topic. So who knows, maybe in the future the internet won't be the same both sides of the Atlantic, Vicky. I'm not suggesting that's a good thing, but that's literally what this article is exploring. Other stuff, as I say, I won't go through all of these. Actually, I should have highlighted the middle one, actually. The sort of regional internet registries governance document, you may recall, I think that hasn't been updated for about 2 decades, and on the back of some issues with Afrinic, it was being updated. It's had 2 iterations where it's gone out for consultation on a draft. Has been amended based on the consultation response, but further consultation, further amendments, and what's the final draft, I think what the authors hope is the final draft, is now, I should say, backtrack, that's wrong. They now issued a summary of what comments have been received on the second draft, and they hope to produce soon a final draft which will be circulated to the regional internet registries, so the likes of RIPE and ARIN and so on, as well as ICANN for approval and ultimately adoption. But I think that's a little way off yet. So those of you that have an interest in RIR stuff, you might want to take a look at the sort of governance proposals. Also, bottom of the screen at the moment, many of you will know that Adam Networks do a series of discussions with interesting people. And not that long ago, I know, David, you spoke to Paul Mocker-Petrus, and most recently to Johannes Weber, I presume pronunciation. Talked about some DNS security challenges, which could be quite pertinent to the aforementioned stakeholder group. And there's a really interesting stat that you put in the sort of summary post. Studies show that 90% of malware uses the DNS at some point, often for command and control purposes or data theft, which caught my eye. I'd be fascinated to know the source of that, because that's quite a powerful stat, which I guess is helpful to make the case for things like whether it's zero trust DNS or indeed protective DNS being more widely adopted than it currently is. But yeah, I thought that was an interesting piece, and would commend that to people to watch at your, or listen to at your leisure. And I'll pause in case David wanted to say anything at all. You don't have to, and if you don't unmute, I assume you possibly don't want to. Oh.
I will get you the source of that. That was a quote from Johannes, and he's very good about backing up his data. So I'll ask him.
Yeah, and as I said, I thought that was quite a powerful stat, to be honest. It really caught my attention. I hadn't seen it before, so yeah, if there's a source for that, that will be really useful to have. Thank you. Other stuff, since I mentioned the DNS4EU group, the stakeholder group of the DNS4EU project met just over a week and a half ago, and the recording from that session is now available. I think it's about 90 minutes long, so worth a listen if you have time. But perhaps even more importantly, since the Infoblox threat intel team were mentioned, there's a really good piece in Tech Radar with Renee Burton, the VP of the threat intel team, talking about Detour Dog and the scale of impact that has had, just explaining how it worked. It was, I sort of pitched to a less technical level perhaps than some of the sort of main Infoblox blog posts, which is great. So I thought quite accessible, and it was also referenced elsewhere by at least one of the person. Eric Hastings in WebPro News as well, sort of wrote about it and then linked to the article. So you get a sort of a different take from him as well. And then finally, one that caught my eye was a DNS-based hijacking campaign that is using a bulletproof hosting provider that's already been sanctioned by the US Treasury back end of last year. So I hadn't seen a write-up about that before, but yeah, that's also worth a look as well. And then just a small number of things from last week. It's been really sort of get to talk about them. There's a short piece, a Reddit thread, sort of discussing how effective a range of different DNS-based ad blocking methods are, and also how effective they are for countering and tracking, which may appeal to some. I don't know if Pete's still on the call, for example. It's not a very long piece, so going to take a few seconds to scan. Also, there was an article on an Apple encrypted DNS profile generator to generate configuration profiles for .dot and .do on Apple devices, which I saw Andreas sort of posted a link to that over the weekend, which just reminded me it was probably worth highlighting. And also two things which had caused issues. One was an error with DNS configuration by Microsoft, which routed stuff to Sumitomo Electric somewhat randomly. And then secondly, the one an issue with a denial of service vulnerability in the bind software, which has since been fixed. So both of those were covered over the last week or so. But they have now been fixed, importantly. So interesting to see some of the background to that. Let's just see a couple of other things I'll highlight. From back to this week. I won't go through all of these. The various regulators in the EU, Australia, and Ofcom, looking at age assurance measures, so that could be worth a look. Some signal account highlighting. There's obviously a whole load of things I'm skipping over, clearly, which I'm not going to talk to. I think that was probably it. Kurt, you've got your hand raised. Did you want to jump in on something?
Not directly, but I wanted to add something at the end if it's possible.
Okay, yeah, of course. We will have time for any other business at the end, I'm sure. Just a reminder in terms of looming deadlines, there's a few coming up over the next week or so. So if you've got an interest in the Eurodig 2026 program, that's for the meeting in Brussels in May, I think it is. There's out for comment at the moment. You've got till the 15th to comment, so worth taking a look at that. Similarly, if you want to apply to participate in YouthDig, the deadline for that's the 16th, and maybe colleagues won't cast aspersions on the age range on this call, but you may be suitable for others of your acquaintance. Also, the OART 46 early bird registration deadline is the 17th. The ICANN leadership positions. There's 7 leadership positions, including 2 in board members. You've got the 18th and then final of this stream. The RIPE early bird registration deadline is the 20th. That's for the meeting in Edinburgh immediately after the OARC 46 meeting in May of this year. So various things coming up, and that bottom one, actually, that's the which I didn't highlight. If you want to join, oh no, sorry, that's the MAG, not the European Commission. Ignore that. That's something else entirely. We'll talk about that next week. Sorry, bottom of this screen is what I meant to say. If you now are inspired by what you've heard, you want to take part in the European Commission Multi-Stakeholder Forum, that's the link to use, which I think is also in the chat as well. So you can apply should you wish. Finally, from me, there's a lot of events coming up. Some ones I've added to the list since last week. Today in the US, State of the Net conference is taking place, and that's been live streamed, so you can join that at any point. I think remote access is at no cost. Middle of this week, you've got ICANN's Emerging DNS Abuse Trends and Mitigation Strategies. Again, a hybrid event that you can join remotely at no cost. Yeah, and there's a public planning meeting for Eurodig, which I've highlighted on the 17th. And then finally, the other new one that I've added, which is now confirmed, ICANN's Contracted Parties Summit, which meets annually. This year is in Manchester in the UK, 28th, 29th of April. And the draft agenda has been published in the last few days. So that's also now available as well. So those are all new additions, which is why they're highlighted on that list. Okay, and then finally, in terms of topics for discussion, unless we cover it now, I was going to make time for Colin next week, Colin Robbie, to talk about addressing fraud as an accessibility issues using DNS text records. And then I think the agenda will be available in time, so I'll do a preview of the RSA conference on the 23rd. So that's the current plan, and then other stuff following on from there. Okay, so that brings us on to any other business. So let me first stop sharing. Let me just Colin first, because you put something in the chat. Colin, unless you want to cover it this week, we'll have more time next week.
I always like to whet people's appetite. I'm very good at doing that. So I've managed to bump into like the UK's fraud minister at conferences and give my little sound bite is that the internet could be a lot safer if we just employed people with visual impairments in cybersecurity audit and compliance roles and make the entire compliance and cyber industry fully accessible. And the way I advocate doing that is putting verification information into DNS. So that it can be queried before a potentially compromised website. You pull data from a potentially compromised website. It's performant just using DNS as an API, really, surfacing some of the whois, stroke RDAP type information into DNS. It allows you to get a bit of data sovereignty because I'd like jurisdiction in there. I'm looking to develop a bit of a lingua franca between various compliance taxonomies, so that there's a common compliance framework. I call this concept a simplified web of trust, a non-cryptographic, and it will be verified by visually impaired auditors. So employing the visually impaired who are historically underemployed, of which there are 1 billion globally, depending on how you count it. In the UK, there's 2 million visually impaired, 490,000 registered blind. Again, historically underemployed. Lord Holmes in the UK, who's been doing a lot of work around AI regulation, is very keen on the concept. But I've just been finding it very hard to find people to talk to about it. I think I may have found the right forum.
Fantastic. Well, I think that's probably teed things up nicely for next week then. So that will give people a sense of what we'll touch on next week. So get your sort of thinking caps on, and yeah, you can expand on that in a bit more detail next week then, Colin, and we can explore that topic. So yeah, that sounds really interesting. All right, so
do people have views on Oblivious DNS?
Sorry?
People have any views on Oblivious DNS?
We have talked about that previously. Hold that question for next week. Yeah. There's probably more than a 30-second soundbite. I'm conscious. I do want to bring Kurt in as he's been waiting patiently. So yeah. Also, come on with any thoughts you have on Oblivious. I have some. I'm sure other people do too. Kurt, though, please. Yeah.
Yes, thanks, Andrew. Let me first explain a little bit what I have observed. I'm looking very closely at my home network, and I'm running my own DNS, and I would like to have control over what's happening. And I was a little bit surprised last 6 months what's going on, because normally I always had the impression that I could steer my own DNS request somewhere to my own Raspberry, not unbound, something task that I'm running myself via DHCP. But I see more and more of these embedded apps within smart TVs and also on the mobile phones directly hitting Google name services. So completely bypassing everything what you have set up in your local network. And I'm completely redirecting this traffic now to an internal interface to see which types of ads are directly or apps are directly contacting other types of DNS services beyond the services I'm intending to do. And this is really something that is getting a little bit out of hand now, that you have totally no control anymore over your devices and your apps. What are they doing in the network? Which is, to my opinion, really worrisome.
Two thoughts on that. One, which I hadn't thought of, but David did, which is Zero Trust DNS. That's all in lowercase, so not specifically calling out the Microsoft offering. Others are available, including Don't Talk to Strangers, is potentially useful in that space. But also, if Jim is still on. Jim has been doing some work, I think, in this space, Jim, on IoT devices, specifically with colleagues from several universities, UK and France at least, I think, Jim.
Yeah, it's with UCL and INRIA, the research organization in France. And they've done some investigation into IoT devices. Definitely you're right that the devices do seem to query a well-known open resolver, and probably shouldn't, depending upon the nature of the network. That can be blocked at network level as a mitigation. But there is an internet draft that has not long ago been updated, and I'm looking for feedback on, so I'll quickly find that link and post it here.
Okay, so it's a known problem now. Okay.
I'll share that with the notes as well.
Oh, thanks, Andrew.
Yeah, so yeah, that's a timely reminder that's in train, Kurt. Yeah, and as I recall from the presentations at RIPE and elsewhere from some of the people involved in this research, there's a lot of badly behaved and extremely insecure devices. I mean, if you watch the presentation, you probably want to quickly rip out any IoT type devices, because you'd be mad to have them. But that's easy to say, maybe harder to actually do.
Yeah, I've just put that in the tracker. Andrew Losty, one of the PhD researchers at UCL, gave a recorded presentation at RIPE. So that's there as well. I'll probably have that link to hand as well. So I'll bung that in here.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, great question. Thanks, Kurt. Okay, we're about to time, but let me just check if anyone else has got anything burning you want to raise. I'm not seeing anything. So perhaps give you 30 seconds back. You can quickly go on to the Quad9 site and buy your fantastic sort of Quad9 sort of wear. Because why wouldn't you want that? As you can see, it's extremely stylish. Well, maybe that's just me. Right, on that note, have a fantastic week, everyone. Good to see you all. Good discussion, so thank you in particular. to Ross and Jim and Philippe for your insights, and see you all same time next week when you've already heard something that we'll be talking about from Colin. So catch you all then. Have a great week. Bye, everyone.
Cheers, Andrew. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.